Japan shall never be allowed to develop weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons. First of all, she basically violated the terms upon which Japan unconditionally surrendered to China. Secondly, Japan unconditionally promised that Japan recognizes there is only one China and Taiwan being part of China. Thirdly, she is in violation of the Constitution of Japan. First of all, she basically violated the terms upon which Japan unconditionally surrendered to China back in 1945. Don't forget, Japan unconditionally surrendered and made all kinds of promises and commitments of not threatening China, not invading China, not launching any military aggression against China. So she is violating the unconditional surrender instrument of Japan as far as China is concerned. Secondly, Japan unconditionally promised in the documents leading to the normalization of relations between China and the People's Republic of China that Japan recognizes there is only one China and Taiwan being part of China. In that framework, whatever involves the relations across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait is purely an internal matter of China. And Japan, by any stretch of the imagination, has no legal right to be involved at all in the cross-strait relations. Thirdly, she is in violation of the Constitution of Japan, and she is in violation of all the relevant rules and regulations about Japan. Let me be very specific. Japan is only allowed to set up self-defense force in Japan, and there are rules prohibiting dispatching of any Japanese soldiers abroad on a combative mission. Now, what Prime Minister Takaichi wants to do is to dispatch Japanese soldiers to areas involving China's Taiwan province for an overseas combative mission. In that sense, she is a criminal under the Constitution of Japan. She has become the first sitting Prime Minister of Japan since 1945 to threaten war against China, to talk about war using force against China. Let me tell you, there is nothing more egregious than this. Now, this is, again, very serious, because I want to take this opportunity to make one point. Japan will forever be disallowed to develop weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons. The moment Japan wants to develop a nuclear weapon, it will be the moment of annihilation, because the victor nations, including China, will never allow Japan to develop weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons. So this is fast becoming the moment of truth. And I hope people throughout the world, all the peace-loving countries and people in the world, will realize the gravity of this moment and will do the right thing. That is to prevent Japan from betraying all the commitments it went into when it unconditionally surrendered to China. I think whatever Prime Minister Takaichi is doing will have major repercussions. Now, she has several options. One is to resign, to recognize all the mistakes she has made and all the repercussions she has caused by her very wrongful, very egregious acts and statements. Secondly, she will be forced out of office, either by party members of the Liberal Democratic Party, of which she is the chairwoman, or by the politics inside Japan as a whole. Or, for example, the electorates in Japan may eventually force her out or force the LDP out of office in a very massive way. Or, for example, she persists in her wrongdoing and even put into action whatever she threatens to do, that is to amend the Japanese constitution, which will not be possible because China will never allow Japan to abandon its commitment to peace. And if Japan wants to play with fire, by abandoning the commitments to peace, it will be again a moment of truth. China has no problem with the Japanese people. What China has a problem with is with Prime Minister Takaichi. She cannot mislead the Japanese people, and she cannot push the Japanese people into abyss of war, and she cannot deprive the Japanese people of the sanity of loving peace, for example, and she should not be allowed to turn every inch of land in Japan into a scorching battleground. As I mentioned, whatever Prime Minister Takaichi is doing is turn the table on Japan's terms of unconditional surrender back in 1945. This can be related to Taiwan, or this can be of no relation with Taiwan at all. They are turning the table on what it's committed back in 1945 when Japan unconditionally surrendered. So this is not purely across strait relations. Now, the other thing is that if Japan constitutes a new threat to China or to any other countries, especially those countries it surrendered to back in 1945, Japan may actually trigger the enemy state clause in the United Nations. Now, again, allow me to say, this may or may not be related to the situation involving the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. So, from my perspective, what Prime Minister Takaichi is doing right now is not only constituting a threat to China, threatening to use force as far as the cross-strait relations are concerned, but she is constituting a much larger threat to peace and stability and tranquility in this part of the world. Now, this is very serious. Allow me to emphasize, for the benefit of the people in the United States and other countries, if Japan will be allowed to turn the table on its commitments under the unconditional surrender instruments to China and several other countries, Japan can turn the table again as far as the United States is concerned, or as far as Russia is concerned, or as far as Britain is concerned. So this, again, is much broader and much more all-embracing than the situation involving the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. She is the sitting Prime Minister of Japan. Whatever she says in her official position represents the Japanese government, and to a larger extent, it also represents the collective will of the Japanese nation. Unless she will be defeated, unless she will acknowledge all her mistakes, and unless we tell her and convince the rest of the world that Prime Minister Takaichi does not represent the Japanese government and she does not represent the Japanese nation, because otherwise, I think this moment of truth will be very, very terrible. Now, this is, as far as concerned, a very serious moment in the 80 years after Japan unconditionally surrendered. And I do believe the Chinese government, the Chinese people, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, together with all the peace-loving countries throughout the world, will never allow Japan to constitute another threat to peace and stability, not only as far as China is concerned, but globally, as far as the world is concerned. I don't think we need to really read the tea leaves as far as Prime Minister Takaichi is concerned. I think she made the step forward in the wrong direction. We need to stop her right away. Whatever her intentions, whatever political forces are behind her, for example, we don't care that much. We only care about one thing. The sitting Prime Minister of Japan made the wrong step in the wrong direction of rearming Japan, remilitarizing Japan, which may trigger the re-emergence of Japanese fascism, which will cause another scourge, another conflagration in this part of the world. So, whatever Prime Minister Takaichi's real intent, well, let historians read about that. Let us focus on what matters most. As I mentioned, we do not need to go too much into history, back into, let's say, 1894, 1895, or the 50 years of Japanese occupation of Taiwan. I think it is important, but for the moment, let me emphasize the jugular point has the several points. One is Japan's unconditional surrender back in 1945. This verdict, Japan can never overturn, and they can never change this verdict. We need to hold Japan responsible for the unconditional surrender terms it entered into. That's number one. Number two is that Japan will not be allowed to change the peaceful nature of the Japanese constitution. Now, the moment they want to change that, that will be the moment of truth, because Japan has no right to abandoning peace and to re-embracing war as an instrument of its government. That's very clear. Now, the third thing is that Japan should fully understand its legal status within the United Nations system under the United Nations Charter. It is an enemy state, and it will be really very much suffering the consequences if Japan wants to constitute another threat to China or any other country, for example, especially those countries that Japan unconditionally surrendered back in 1945. And for all these things together, I think they should be sufficient to nail Prime Minister Takaichi to the pillar of history. And if she really wants to make all the wrong movements in the wrong direction of destroying peace in this part of the world, then the moment of truth will hit her as hard as it can, and the Japanese nation will face all the consequences.